Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today's guest is Maya Horgan Famodu, and she is the founder of Ingressive Capital. This interview is part of our Milken Global Conference coverage series where we bring you the best of individuals that attended, participated, panelists, speakers, VIPs, all of the above, everything surrounding the Milken Global Conference in Beverly Hills, California. Maya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. I am very glad to be here.
All right, Maya. So lots to talk about today. So, of course, I want to get into what you're doing over at Ingressive Capital and also your concept of building billion-dollar companies from overlooked African markets. So excited to get into that. But before we do, I do want to talk about the Milken Global Conference a bit. So have you been before? Is this your first year? I mean, for me, this is like my Super Bowl of conferences every year, so I love attending it. Every year, I already know I'm blocking off the calendar. I will be there. But what's your connection to the Institute, the conference? Talk to me.
Yeah, so I have a few connection points. The first one is last year was my first time ever attending Milken and really ever even hearing of the Milken Conference. And I was invited as a guest speaker to talk about Africa, early stage technology on the continent, emerging mood trends, youth populations, etc. And so last year was my first time speaking, and also similarly, it was very much a Super Bowl of conferences experience. That's a perfect way to describe it. I met so many interesting people, so many new investors, so many new business partners. And I was just, to be amongst global leaders, people who are literally making decisions that transform their industry in almost every sector was really a transformative thing for me and something that I thought was important enough to similarly dedicate that time every year. And then this year I was nominated to become part of the Young Leaders Circle, which is the Milken Under 40 group of entrepreneurs. And that's what I'm doing now. So this year I attended as a YLC member as well as a delegate.
Amazing. So year one to year two, give me some behind the scenes. I know my first year, it was like a fire hose of information, of experiences. I was like, and somebody else that was on, these are not my words. I said the Super Bowl conference, and somebody else that was on this series said it was like brain candy, and they were just overwhelmed like a little kid in a candy store. And coming from the VC that said it to me, I was like, oh, that's a good description. Thank you. I didn't expect that one. From you, like year one to year two, any differences? More acclimated year two, or what was it like? Like that, the community side of things, what was it like?
Yeah, so I am a little woo-woo, and what I mean by that,
me too.
So that's and there's a little bit of my context. My dad is a Christian pastor in Lagos, Nigeria, so very, very traditional and conservative Nigerian, and my mom, she's a former military vet, but is an artist now in Minnesota, so she's Minnesotan, so it comes a little bit from my mom's side. But in any case, I found the first year, it was very structured, tried attending panels, had a list of people that I wanted to connect with, was in meetings all day, etc. And I had some...
Bless your heart. That was awesome. From the Minnesota side of things, I'm just going to say bless your heart. Go ahead.
Thank you. And then on this year, so as opposed to structuring the whole thing and making sure my calendar and agenda was totally fixed and set, I went in because we're not raising right now, and I really didn't have any I didn't have anything immediate that I needed to accomplish. There was nothing that I was, feeling guilty about spending my time doing Milken instead of. And so this year, I went just kind of open and like, hey, I'm here to build relationships to help me transform the continent in the future. And it was incredible, absolutely incredible, the number of CIOs. A lot of times I would just go and stand in the hallway and let people come up to me. And the people that I met, not only this year, I made actual real friends that, as I'm traveling around the world for business, I have new friends that I'm calling and connecting with that I've already met up with in wonderful places. But also I met people who are like, hey, I want to invest in your fund right now. Are you interested to launch your next vehicle? So, fundraise when you don't actually need the money. And I recognize all the more like being able to really see that in practice. We were not at the time raising our Fund 3, and it was a great time to then initiate the raise when we really don't have any urgency around it. Yeah, it went really well, and definitely I know my strategy for the future.
That's amazing. I'm glad to hear. And I guess transitioning slightly here, your mandate and what you're aiming to do, building billion-dollar companies in the African markets and some untapped African markets. How did you come about this thesis? Where did that begin?
Yeah, so actually it's been kind of a lifelong journey and a long-standing conviction that has been cultivated. And I mentioned my dad from Nigeria. So my dad and his brothers came to Minnesota from Nigeria for higher education. And they all settled down with blonde hair, blue-eyed Swedish descendants. And thus us mixed kids emerged in small cities across Minnesota. And so I grew up with this really interesting case study of watching Nigerians in Nigeria versus Nigerians in Minnesota. And all things constant, same background, same upbringing, general same age range, same education, et cetera. The only differentiating factor where they were trying to build their businesses. And I watched those on the continent grapple with lack of access to capital, political instability, like real struggle with distribution, et cetera. But when they were able to succeed, it was a far greater outcome on the continent than their Western counterparts, so than their siblings that were in the U.S. And so I was like, okay, significantly greater risk, much higher potential for failure, but significantly greater reward on the other side. So I just grew up watching that, and it was really interesting to me. And then also, I grew up really poor in rural Minnesota. And so on the American side, being able to, growing up, I was really smart, straight A student in all the honors classes, and they would invite me to do the science academies in the summer, the STEM courses. And I always really wanted to do them, but we never had enough money to pay for the program. And so I hated that feeling so much growing up of being smart enough and being hungry enough to do something great, but resources or variables outside of my control preventing me from doing something. And so that feeling stuck with me, and not wanting others to experience that, as well as watching the potential of the continent. And so I did the Cornell pre-law program. I worked in the legal space some, thinking that the solution was from the regulatory and the government perspective, like allocating access to capital, making things easier for entrepreneurs. And then I realized in emerging markets globally, but specifically in emerging markets, it's really that private sector drives government rather than government driving private sector. And so I'm like, how can I get into the space of allocating capital? And so at the ripe old age of 23, once I'd graduated from college and the Cornell pre-law program, I got in. At first, I just wanted to be an analyst at a VC fund, and nobody would hire me. They're like, you studied environmental policy and law. This makes no sense. You should go do something else. And I was like, VC in Africa is really young. I may be really young, but so is VC in Africa. And I think I can just do this myself if you're not going to hire me. And so at 23, I just went out and tried launching my first fund, and eventually was able to bring a lot of global investors to the continent, and tech companies, help them expand into Africa, run their strategies for them, build a profitable business, and then eventually launch a venture fund. And at the time, I was the youngest in Africa to launch a VC fund. So that's how I got into the space.
Wow, what an amazing story. And from your angle, obviously your original connection, but what do you think now in hindsight versus like right now? What makes early stage investing in Africa like high potential? Like for those that haven't considered investing in the market, or even maybe for some that have invested slightly, but they're not completely educated on it. Like what makes it so uniquely high potential?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. So this correlation is not always definitive, but it's pretty darn consistent globally, where there is high population growth, typically so too is there high economic growth or high GDP growth. And what I mean by that is Africa has some of the fastest growing populations in the world. Nigeria will be a top 3 largest country by 2050. In 2100, we'll add several other African continents to that list, including Uganda. And so one, just the sheer growth of populations on the continent, the sheer number of youth, about 75% of Africans are under the age of 35. We're getting very close to 1.5 billion people on the continent. So very fast growing, a lot of young people, and then this decentralized tech enablement. So about 60% of developers on the continent are self-taught, which means even if they're in villages, even if they're sheep herders' sons and daughters, as long as they can get access to a technical tool, whether a smartphone, which is now, we have 80% and above mobile penetration in our core market, some of them even 100%, like Egypt and Morocco, are very high rates of mobile penetration. Young people who have smartphones and devices and are learning in a decentralized manner and getting access to getting online and competing on the global platform. So just that alone is really interesting. But then also in any given year, you have typically 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies. So that means, as I've mentioned, there's typically a correlation between very, very high population growth as well as very high economic growth. And so you have 6 of the 10 sometimes 7, sometimes 5, sometimes 8 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in Africa, as well as the fastest growing populations and the youngest populations. And so all of this, plus it's just one of those things it's like heuristics. It's one of those things you just have to get on ground to experience. I've lived in a lot of places around the world, and Nigeria, these tech ecosystems across Africa, unquestionably it's the most entrepreneurial place I would ever see. Like even the security guard at the store has a side business. Everyone has a small business. Everyone is doing something that requires forced ingenuity, given the inefficiencies of the market, and also the very high entrepreneurial drive to figure things out and build things leads to really incredible businesses coming out. So increased rates of internet penetration, very young, fast-growing GDPs, and just a general ethos of building things and in innovating and finding solutions for local problems.
Wow. Let's getting back to your fund a bit with some of the time that we have left. So tell me a little bit more about the fund itself and maybe some of the things that you're looking for, the investment thesis. Like, are there certain industries that you're focusing on versus others? What are some of the parameters of what you're looking for in an investment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at pre-seed and seed stage technology companies in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Egypt, and Morocco. We look at these 5 countries because they're some of the fastest growing tech ecosystems in Africa. South Africa would be on that as well. They're some of the largest as far as the key recipients of venture capital dollars and the highest concentrations of technical talent across Africa. They have relatively similar per capita GDP, so between 2,000 and 3,500 per capita GDP, relatively similar mobile penetration rates, 80% and above, relatively similar internet penetration rates, at least 50% and above, and relatively similar infrastructure and consumer demographics. So Morocco is, I'd say, far ahead of the pack in a lot of this, except for they have very, very low financial inclusion rates, which is interesting. For such a developed country, everyone still likes to use cash. But aside from that, they have really, really low interest rates and really, really low devaluation and inflation rates, as in very stable currency. They even currently have an inflation rate lower than the U.S. So very, very stable economy. It's much smaller. It's a fraction of Nigeria or Kenya or South Africa, but it's very, very stable. So it works to diversify our portfolio. Egypt, 100 million person population, very young, very fast growing, very solid infrastructure, but a big market for launching, and you could build $1 billion company just focused on the Egyptian market alone. Nigeria, 200 million, but very, very, it's much more difficult to do business. If you figure it out in Lagos, you can do it anywhere. If you figure out in Nigeria, you can do it anywhere, similar to New York. Like if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere.
Yeah.
Kenya is more stable, but it has a very developed fintech sector, so there's just less opportunity. But in all of these countries where we're investing, and there's Ghana as well. In all these countries, when you land and launch a business in one place, it's feasible to launch in those other markets. So we're focused on building sort of an API. So when you plug into one, you can get access to the rest of the companies, or you can get access to the rest of the countries that we're investing in. And we have companies in our portfolio like Start Button, one of our recent investments, that that actually functions like an API. When you launch a business in one market, they can assist you to expand rapidly across the continent. And pre-seed and seed stage, like with our fund, about 75% of our first checks we invest in companies that are valued $5 million post-money and below. And about 60% we invest in companies that are valued $2.5 million in post-money valuation and below. So very early stage, but these are post-traction businesses that are generating thousands of dollars in month-over-month revenue, significant user growth, et cetera, like high-growing businesses that would be probably 10 times the value or the cost in the U.S., but very fast-growing. And then we do very early stage because they are significantly discounted when other venture funds from the continent or angel investors from the continent are the ones leading the rounds. And then the prices get corrected at Series A once international firms start coming in. So historically, about 80% of the capital backing African tech comes from international venture funds. And so we invest very early. We help these companies to scale and grow, and then give them access or help them gain access to international investment funds where there's a significant premium from that point on as far as their round valuation.
Amazing. Maya, this has been great. I learned a lot today about the different markets. I love the way you broke it down in some of the different regions. And I'm sure that individuals listening to this show are going to want to follow up, learn more, connect. How do people do that? How do they learn more about the fund? How do they connect?
Yeah, so multiple ways. So one is www.ingressivecapital, INGRESSIVE capital.com. You can check it on our website. There, you can find there all of the companies we've ever invested in, a lot of information on what we're doing and why, and we also do these monthly market trends reports, so research reports on macro and micro factors across Africa, so you can really get a taste for what's really happening on the continent and why. And then also I'm on social media, X, Instagram, LinkedIn. It's just Maya Horgan Famodu, and my name is on all of those ones. So yeah, happy to get in touch. I also do a lot of video content about African emerging trends and content for founders and investors thinking about getting active in Africa. So definitely happy to connect.
Amazing. And for everybody listening, just so you know, we'll definitely put some links in the show notes so you can just click on the links and head right on over. And speaking of the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. Each and every day we're bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way in your journey as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow button. And Maya, thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Adam.